Iowa-based consulting firm Context publishes an annual report on the global proprietary seed market, valued in 2011 at $37 billion US. Highlighting double-digit growth rates, these reports laud the recent rise in patented seeds and the decline of both farmer-saved and non-patented seeds. In the US, though, the private seed industry dates back to at least the 1930s, when hundreds of companies formed to act as brokers between farmers and the land-grant universities and agriculture experiment stations that develop most new seed varieties. With the 1970 Plant Variety Protection Act, this trend redoubled as novel seeds became eligible for intellectual property rights. The 21st century proprietary seed market emerges from these economic and legal developments that usher in a new narrative, I argue, of propagation and cultivation, one we might title the post-industrial seed. Today, proprietary is taken to be more or less synonymous with transgenic. Seeds developed with genetic traits for herbicide tolerance, insect resistance, or both. So-called blended seeds, if you encounter that term. As of 2012, the USDA reports nearly 90% of all corn planted in the US was transgenic. Of course, genetically engineered and genetically modified, rather than proprietary and patented, are the terms that galvanize many environmentalists and consumer health advocates in an anti-GMO movement. This movement has mobilized people in no small measure via a primarily moral argument, as sociologists Rachel Sherman and William Monroe have observed, according to which transgenic science is a priori wrong for, quote, playing God in the garden. While provocative, this habit of mine, I contend, blurs the edges between the environmental and social impacts of transgenic seeds, and between the legal, economic, and cultural consequences of seed patenting. It also posits a monolithic set of values as the glue, binding anti-GMO activism and related movements for food system change. And we might think here of Dr. Gupta's sort of comment about aspirations and aspirational economies, and to what extent, even in an oppositional movement, we would want to kind of construct a singular set of aspirations. And finally, it advances just two possible narratives. On the one hand, the conservation of heirloom seeds, and on the other, the monopoly of biotech corporations. Stories on environmental blogs about the Supreme Court case of Bowman versus Monsanto, which the justices this week decided unanimously in favor of Monsanto, highlight the stark view of a world divided neatly into two. Yet this binary arguably short-circuits public discussion about the differences between particular GMOs, as well as about the legal origins as opposed to the social impacts of seed patenting. It does so in part by giving too much rhetorical ground to a single corporation, by casting one company, if you will, in the starring role of villain. Rather than, we love a villain, right? We love a villain, a good villain. Right? It's not Batman who brings people to the theater. Rather than a binary of Monsanto's world and its singular opposite, there is in fact multiplicity. From the informal and unpredictable seed exchanges among small-scale farmers in specific regions, to open access seed lines developed at agricultural research stations and by just a handful of plant breeders like our distinguished speaker, Stephen Jones. Rather than a binary of Monsanto's world and its singular opposite then, I would invite us to build a library of stories. A library that, akin to a seed collection, offers both knowledge of historical practices and a range of possibilities for the future. My talk today grows out of a very new project about the multiplicity of stories that have taken shape around seeds in the decades since recombinant DNA. By story, I mean not only the stuff of fiction and film, but also the inherent narrative capacities of images, maps, models, social media, and even built environments or infrastructures. In particular, I'm exploring narratives of seed diversity that take shape in two contemporary movements, both of which ostensibly resist the proprietary seed paradigm. Institutionalized seed banks on the one hand, and informal seed networks on the other. So in initial primary research, I worked with incredible team of undergraduate students to identify, annotate, and digitally archive over 100 artifacts so far related to these two movements, from video footage of the internationally run Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, and an NPR story about a scrappy seed library in Basalt, Colorado, to virtual catalogs in video games, virtual seed catalogs in video games like Minecraft, and Pinterest sites on how to make a seed bomb as a wedding favor. And here is this dynamo team of undergraduate researchers I'm working with. Jonathan is here. Is anyone else here? No? And Nicole. The aim of this research is to archive what would be otherwise ephemeral stories across a range of media about seed propagation, cultivation, collecting, and exchange. One of my central questions in sifting through these materials is about how different communities, including scientific communities, conceptualize technology. The pastoral strain in the anti-GMO movement, its story of conserving the past as the only possible bulwark against monoculture and agribusiness, proves not to be the only story that opponents of proprietary seeds are crafting. The writers, artists, scientists, farmers, gardeners, and activists I have been researching redefine rather than reject out of hand the technological. And they do so by calling attention to the inherent technological dimensions of seed propagation and cultivation, while conceptualizing technology not as a proprietary commodity, but as a creative resource, as in techne, the ancient Greek word meaning the art, craft, technique, method, or skill in making something, but also as in techno, the root meaning know-how and applied science. So to flesh out this claim, I'll turn really briefly to two very different case studies that speak to my view that storytelling is particularly nimble in thinking complexly about technologies of seed improvement, planting, saving, and so on. What follows also offers a test case for thinking about applied practices and physical infrastructures related to seeds through the lens of narrative. So these case studies are, first, a fictional conflict between the biotech industry and open-pollinated seed advocates in Ruth Ozeki's 2003 novel, All Over Creation, and second, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault project in Norway. While both writers like Ozeki and projects like Svalbard share investments in biological as well as cultural diversity, this comparison draws into relief equally central investments in technology. In The Consequences of Modernity, Anthony Giddens defines post-industrial societies as those in which political power and material wealth go increasingly to the institutions, firms, and professional innovators who manage information. We can similarly argue that a post-industrial food system is one in which power goes to those who design, own, license, and analyze such complex information systems, from technology use agreements for seeds to GPS data for monitoring water, soil, and weather. Japanese-American novelist and documentarian Ruth Ozeki takes up this question of how seeds and data connect to one another in a post-industrial and transgenic context. Consider the all-over-creation character, Will Quinn, an Idaho potato farmer who, having purchased GPS software, spends as much time at the computer trying to input data and generate readouts and maps as farming his 3,000 acres. Months after investing in this data-centered model of precision farming, moreover, he is still trying to master the basics of analysis. The novel rounds out this portrait of high-tech farming in the conclusion, where we encounter allusions to two contemporary legal conflicts. One, the patent and copyright infringement suits Monsanto has filed against farmers around the world, in fact, and two, libel cases against activists for critiquing agribusiness in a range of media, those so-called veggie libel laws. However, in its cross-pollinating plot, where activists and PR machines and where transgenic and open-pollinated seeds interface, All Over Creation positions technology at the center not just of large-scale computer-managed farming, but also small-scale cultivation and bootstrapped food activism. All Over Creation is structured around several plots. One centers on character Yumi Fuller's return to Idaho after a 20-year absence where she lived in Hawaii to care for her aging parents. The other focuses on the formation of an unlikely coalition between Yumi's conservative parents, Lloyd and Momoko, and a motley band of anti-GMO activists led by the character Geek, who call themselves the Seeds of Resistance. Running through the story is the concept of information, a term that appears more than 30 times, almost always in the context of how seeds circulate within and across different kinds of communities and networks. One of the protests of the Seeds of Resistance stages in an Ohio supermarket comedically highlights the importance of networks of information in these social movements. By 12:12, information was relayed from aisle 1, fresh produce, through to aisle 7, cleaning products and picnic wear, and the operatives headed toward the checkout lanes. A quick reconnoiter revealed a healthy target demographic: mothers with infants, preschool toddlers, and some early elementary school children too. In all of her creation, characters repeatedly explain agriculture through analogies to communication media, from books and libraries to software programs and computer chips. The upshot of these analogies comes to light in an extended description of open pollinated seeds. Every seed has its story, Geek says, encrypted in a narrative line that stretches back for thousands of years. Seeds tell the story of migrations and drifts, so if you learn to read them, they are very much like books, with one big difference. What's that? Yumi's 6-year-old daughter Ocean interjects, and we realize we are listening in on a bedtime story. Yumi continues, the difference is this: book information is relevant only to human beings. It's expendable, really. As someone who has to teach for a living, I shouldn't be saying this, but the planet can do quite well without books. However, the information contained in a seed is a different story, entirely vital, pertaining to life itself. Ozeki here defines seeds as a medium not only for life itself, but for archiving information and circulating stories about the world. The heirloom seeds that Momoko and Lloyd Fuller propagate on a tiny plot adjacent to their 3,000-acre potato farm wind up in, quote, envelopes for dissemination by the U.S. Postal Service to destinations around the world. Afraid the seeds will die out with the Fullers, Geek labors to transform the collection from an ancient, dusty library into an ordered system with a comprehensive online catalog. Enlisting Momoko to identify each seed, Geek aspires to construct, quote, a library containing the genetic information of hundreds, maybe thousands, of rare fruits and vegetables. Talk about narrative, Geek explains to Yumi, convincing her of the urgency of migrating the knowledge in one person's mind into a public library. Put differently, this seed library that Geek builds in the fictional world of all of her creation, akin to the political happenings he organizes for the Seeds of Resistance, functions to support both biological conservation and the dispersal of stories. Evident in Geek's seed archive and Yumi's bedtime story, all over creation confronts practices of propagation and cultivation in which not just agribusiness, but also oppositional movements operate through networks, the space of flows that Manuel Castells defines as one of the organizing structures of the information age. To this point, Geek tells new Seeds of Resistance recruit, but the anti-GMO movement is a network of cells, keeping information and energy flowing, like a seed bomb. The novel thus calls into question, or asks us to call into question, the aspiration to realign agriculture with nature by contesting the related notion that natural systems are less complex and more readily comprehensible to us than synthetic ones. The melding of the analog and the digital, of biology and techne in her story world highlights a defining feature of food in digital times. Even the most organic of bodies carry informational imprints and circulate alongside books within both virtual and material networks. In the final analysis, this popular novel asks readers to reimagine the technological seed, though, as a narrative seed, whose biological complexity and cultural meanings embody a world of possibilities beside that of the proprietary seed market. So much more briefly, I will conclude by way of the example of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. So I'm making a kind of abrupt transition from the world of fiction to the world of international consortiums. So the Global Seed Vault sits on Norwegian soil in the Arctic, on a remote archipelago near a town of just 1,900 people. The outcome of an international collaboration, Svalbard is in part a response to doomsday scenarios in which either planetary catastrophe or world warfare decimates much of the human population as well as national seed banks. This is something that was already in the news in both Egypt and Iraq recently, where national seed banks, the one in Iraq being Abu Ghraib, were indeed nearly destroyed by warfare. At the same time, the vault has been accompanied with rhetorical fanfare about its potential as a humanitarian ark of the biological diversity and cultural history stored in seeds. Yet the material structure of Svalbard connects the project less to small-scale, informal seed networks, like that scrappy basalt Colorado Seed Library, or like the more established native seed search exchange in Tucson, and connects it more to large-scale proprietary data networks, that largely invisible infrastructure known as a server farm. Consider the engineering specs for Svalbard, which has a capacity to store 4.5 million seed samples and 2.25 billion seeds, and which offers, quote, backup storage for the 1,400 gene banks around the world, end quote. These engineering specs not only indicate the scale of the seed vault, but also posit a link between the storage of seeds in this vault and the storage of data on the cloud. And indeed, to this point, the Gates Foundation is among Svalbard's major funders. In a 2012 article, the journalist Stephen Levy describes a Google data center he visited as follows. What strikes you immediately is the scale of things. The room is so huge, you can almost see the curvature of earth in the end, and it's wall to wall, racks and racks and racks of servers with blinking blue lights, and each one is many, many times more powerful and with more capacity than my laptop. And you're in the throbbing heart of the internet. This account of the nearly unimaginable infrastructure of information is equally apt, I am suggesting, to the infrastructure for storing and cataloging seeds at Svalbard. Viewed side by side, the space of the seed vault and the space of a Google data center draws our attention simultaneously to the material underpinnings of the cloud and to the abstract vision of seeds as data. Put differently, if we are seeding data, literally reshaping former farmland into rows of server buildings in places like the Dalles, Oregon, projects like Svalbard suggest that we're also digitizing seeds, cataloging them as information. Ozeki's best-selling novel aligns the cultivation and exchange of edible plants with open source software and open access publication. These analogies animate a story of the post-industrial seed that makes political claims for the communal and the amateur, as in doing something for the love of it, over and against the corporate and the specialized. In contrast, the Svalbard Seed Bank in its material design lines up with the data centers or server farms of IT companies like Google. In this sense, Svalbard's infrastructure implicitly upholds post-industrial ideas of technical expertise and information management, even though the rhetoric has been about this kind of humanitarian project of constructing a global